So yesterday, I presented information concerning correlations in events that I've been attempting to bring attention to on what is on the public record concerning situation involving a man by the name of Alexei Navalny, who I first encountered with an understanding that he was involved in media and was a part of a publication identified as a dissident news publication based in Russia. I've not read anything he actually wrote, but I have read what content I could find on the website, which was primarily what I ended up reading about political situation concerning civil government, including elections in parts of Russia outside of Moscow. And I've attempted to contact them directly. I sent them emails. I have not received any confirmation that they received my emails, and I've received no response in the time frame since I learned about them in July of last year. It's important to know that 10 days prior to the incident that happened, where allegedly he was exposed to chemical weapons while attempting to board an aircraft, that I was pinged or I identified. I came across the site. I had never heard of the website before. I'd never heard of anything regarding the website up until then. I found an article on the website. It just so happened the information in that article and the manner in which it was presented was a very critical piece of information that I was looking for in connection with other leads, shall we say, in the investigation. And it had to do specifically with coverage of proceedings in Russia that were involving Americans and a comparison of comparable proceedings in the United States, or rather proceedings in the United States involving people that were Russian nationals. Around this time, I tried to get a job, and as part of what I submitted as evidence yesterday was the receipt. Here's the actual receipt. It's the copy of the receipt I got at the time for the boots. And I say this because this morning, apparently today, there is a media notice about how 14 members of the United States Army in Fort Hood, Texas, were fired and relieved of their command in regards to the murder of a woman named Vanessa Guillen. Vanessa was alleged to have been reported missing from her post. Her body was later found. At the time, my understanding of the media reports on her deaths, which are now acknowledged as having occurred in April of 2020, were that allegedly she was sexually assaulted and beaten to death by another member of the Army who was African American. These were the original charges, and my concern was that at the time, this fit a pattern of race-based violence that had been both simulated and then made literal at various levels throughout Texas ever since I arrived in Texas in 2016. Specifically, there was a manner in which African Americans were cast in a particular element, including in security roles or even roles of law enforcement, with an understanding that Hispanics or Latinos were to be subordinated, with an understanding for a period of time there was supposed to be a subordination or an appearance of subordination by Hispanics or Latinos within the unit, so to speak, and a deferral to a demonstration of subordination to the dominance of the African American in the elements of concern, with an understanding at some point there was going to be a transition. It was as if it was a pre-scripted paradigm. And my understanding is that there had been a period where African American leadership had been assimilated, and conditioned into a particular kind of behavioral paradigm. And then they were supposed to demonstrate it on a certain group of Hispanic leadership in development, and at some point, Hispanic leadership or Latino leadership, depending upon the manner of understanding it at that point in time, would then be able to ascend insofar as they would then be put in a position to be able to replicate that. And there were specific elements of racialization that involved, in my case at least, the middle-aged white woman It had a very specific import. And the ironic thing is, I just found a media notice on a contract from a company called 26 that is a private military contractor. And it just so happens that here in Dallas, the metric 26 ended up being swapped into at the beginning of 2020 when it came to the budget for the housing and urban development regarding white women versus Hispanic and Latina women insofar as it had to do with acquisition of housing. I bring this up now because there's a very alarming situation here. First two things I got when I tried to do a review of factors connected additionally to the specific manner in which 14 people were identified, correlated with a bus crash that happened at the beginning of 2018 in Canada. There was a crash of a bus that had minors that were on their way to a hockey game. At the time, the first reporting within the first 72 hours said that 14 students had died. Now it says 15 died and 14 were injured. But at the time, the initial reporting was that 14 had died. At the time this happened, I did not know, but I was real-time aware that day that something very significant was occurring. So I went through my emails and I began to cross-reference emails that had been sent to me directly involving some form of a motion connected to a lawyer who ostensibly was involved in a probate case regarding custody of two minor children involving a woman who was originally a national from Honduras and who was married to a man who was originally from India. They had two children that were American citizens that were the topic of a custody dispute. The lawyer of concern worked at a firm, and the principal of that firm had a son who worked in another firm. He was a private equity lawyer. That firm has a member on the board of directors, or did at the time, had a member on the board of directors of the Iraqi Gas and Oil Ministry. Something that day compelled me to correlate because my suspicion was that the case involving the custody of the children was being used in some sort of illegal derivative action connected to factors associated with the son's firm. So I analyzed it with a understanding that there were certain patterns that made sense in the context of media reportings that were going on at the time that these filings were sent and these motions were sent to me and to her, but didn't make sense in the actual context of the case. I cross-referenced the dates that those filings were sent to her and I, and with information on the website concerning the blog that they had at the time, this particular law firm that the son worked at had at the time, regarding topics of concern that I understood would be representative of derivatives that could be coded to what otherwise would not make sense about the motions. And all of them lined up. All of them lined up, and there were 14 of them. There were 14 of them between September or August of 2017 and when I checked it at the beginning of 2018 in February, late February of 2018, February. And so at the day it happened, I was doing this research. And my understanding is what happened is I was emailing myself. I was emailing myself the link from the blog that correlated with the blog post that matched up with the motion that had been sent to her and to I regarding activities in the case that otherwise did not make any sense. Now, this young girl was a student of mine. I was a homeschool teacher for this young girl, and I watched horrendous, terrible things happen. And at some point in the course of this situation, the mother and the young girl went on site to pay a court filing fee, and they kidnapped the girl. They kidnapped a girl in a completely racialized scenario that the mother reported to me as being very terrifying, and that was also connected to events that were occurring concurrently in Iraq. This was in addition to an earlier event that had happened when we had been sent an alleged witness list, and the witness list on one level did not make much sense. She had told me that every other witness in her case had been intimidated into refusing to provide testimony. But I reviewed the witness list as it was sent that day, and I evaluated it for what I understood could potentially be ulterior motives. And it was revealed that that day there was an announcement that allegedly IS had executed the same number of people that were listed on the witness list. And I attempted to track how correlations with that witness list were connected to events that had previously happened in her case. And from then on, I began to try to see if there was a demonstrable connection. Now, at some point in this situation, you got to understand this was an incredibly traumatizing situation for both her and for me and anybody that would have been involved. But in addition, this was happening during the time frame after which the hurricane identified as Harvey hit Texas. And a variety of very, very highly illegal activities were occurring. This included what I believe and understand to be the murder of a police officer from the Houston Police Department that was itself coded to allow for a variety of other illegal activities to be connected to it. And indeed, part of the charges had to do with the fact that that lawyer in the case was using the death of the murder of that police officer and things associated with the funeral in connection with whatever else he was doing associated with the efforts to file these motions that otherwise did not make sense and in fact seemed to be incredibly extortionate. I believe that those allegations were founded. And by the time that bus crash occurred, the mother had already had her children kidnapped from her and was already involved in a sham proceeding, allegedly around her immigration. See, up until this time, she had 2 children that were born in the United States. The father had legal agreements, legal parent-child agreements that required him to pay child support in the form of medical insurance to both the boy and to the girl, but under different terms. He just refused to do this. The mother was denied any legal representation, and instead her children were both on Medicare. Medicare that they were only able to access because she was an immigrant. There was absolutely nothing legitimate about any of those lawyers or the judge or any of the judges involved allowing for a case allegedly around a custody dispute to be characterized in the way it was and to repeatedly chastise her when the very legal agreement required him to pay child support in the form of medical insurance for the children that he just refused to do. It revealed what has turned out to be, unfortunately, very true, that they were trafficking those children and they were trafficking her for pension fraud. Let's put it that way. And the demonstration has been meted out over time. Now, my concern has been that part of why this was able to happen is because of a misrepresentation that there was some sort of strategic national security interest in allowing for her children to be used as if they somehow were demonstrative of matters connected to, among other things, actual weapons that would be identifiable in terms of their movements, or given the fact that they both happened to have names that were after places that they actually had a literal connection to, that it was actually part of a complex scheme involving fake litigation to create futures based upon what was going on with the litigation, i.e., they were creating futures to execute based upon tormenting her and trafficking the children in connection with abuse of the judicial process. I am very sorry if you are a member of Miss Guillen's family. I'm very sorry. I knew at the time it was a setup. I have to let you know that you may want to review the report. It was reported in August. And this is another reason. The things that are coming up right now are not only when I'm trying to look for that information about those students that were killed in Canada. There's also a report about seatbelts, which brings into consideration the fact that around the time I purchased these boots for a job, there was a terrorist attack in Lebanon. Now, it has been characterized in many manners, but it was a pre-coordinated terrorist attack that had elements comparable to the one I'm describing to you. And the reason that it is of material interest to you is because it was reported in the media within 10 days of that terrorist attack that a CBRN specialist from Fort Hood also went missing. My understanding is he was a young Hispanic man and that he was a specialist with chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons. His kidnapping, or rather his absence, was reported within 10 days of the terrorist attack in Lebanon. I understood at the time that it was a form of grotesque outlay. This was last August in 2020. I apologize. I wish you well in seeking justice moving forward. If you need to contact me directly, please do.